Good afternoon. My name is Cecile Shea. I'm non-resident senior fellow here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. A very warm welcome to all of you for today's discussion on China's digital yuan, which is very much in the news this week, and what it means for the US and really for the rest of the world. I'm joined today with two very distinguished expert panelists whom I will introduce in one moment. First, just as a reminder, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is nonpartisan, nonprofit. Today's session is on the record, being broadcast across YouTube via Zoom. And one more reminder, views expressed today are those of the speakers only and not necessarily those of the Council on Global Affairs. Deep thanks to the Scholl Foundation for sponsoring today's session, which is part of the Council's Global Economy series. So thank you again to the Scholl Foundation. And thank you to all of our members for your support and your ongoing support. You've kept us in business throughout the pandemic, producing great discussions like today, and we are very grateful and we look forward to your continued support. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists. First is Professor Darrell Duffie, the Adams Distinguished Professor of Management and the Professor of Finance at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He also teaches at the Stanford Department of Economics, where he walks the halls with the spirits of some real giants. So we're very lucky to have him with us today. He is, among other things, an expert on central bank managed digital currencies. He has recently testified before the UK House of Lords and has testified before the US Senate on this topic. We are also joined and very fortunate to be joined by Yaya Fanusie. Mr. Fanusie is the Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Center for New American Security. He is a former intelligence analyst. He is the founder of Cryptocurrency AML Strategies, and he has recently written several very interesting articles on what China's move into a digital yuan means for the Chinese people, for the US, and for the rest of the world. So we're very fortunate to have him here today. So just to get started, Professor Duffie, I confess, for all that I read about digital currencies, I am just so confused. I feel like my dollars are already really digital. I haven't had cash in my wallet for probably 2 years. I don't even think I can find my checkbook right now, even if I have to. So if we're already pretty digital, at least from my perspective, in most parts of this country, what would a digital dollar or a digital yuan? China is already very digital in the way that it pays for things. What is a central bank managed digital currency?
Cecile, sure, I'll answer that question, but first just let me thank you for your warm welcome and for the opportunity to be here at the Chicago Council, especially the chance to talk with Yaya Fanusie, one of the leading experts on your topic today. So, let me make it real simple, because it is pretty simple. A central bank digital currency is, let's say, digital dollar. It's the same as the paper dollars that you used to have in your wallet, except they're electronic now. Once the United States introduces them, if it does, you'll just, instead of taking them out of your pocket wallet, you'll take them out of your phone wallet and tap at Starbucks or the grocery store or your friend's mobile phone to send those digital dollars the same way that you would paper money, except electronically. So they're pretty much the same legally, financially. You just transfer them electronically rather than handing over a piece of paper, which seems to me kind of antiquated. That in the well into the 21st century, we're still handling grubby little bits of paper when we could be doing the same thing that we're doing with credit cards and other payment methods. Your payment experience when you go into Starbucks will be very much the same as with your Apple Pay or any other kind of mobile payment service that you might already be using. So if you're not carrying paper money now, that probably means that you're adept at doing these kinds of payments, and you'll just do the same thing that you're always doing. And I'm sure Yaya today and I are going to engage on why we would want to use a digital dollar rather than your credit card or some other digital payment method, but it sure is going to be convenient, and it has many advantages that I'm sure we're going to engage on today, but very, very simple to use. It's just taking money out of your stack of digital dollars and paying that way rather than out of your stack of paper money.
So this is what I don't understand. So right now, if I pay someone via Venmo or, whatever, right, the money comes out of my account at Chase.
Exactly.
Will I not have an account at Chase anymore? Will I have an account at the Fed and my dollars will come out of there?
You will have an account at the Fed, but Chase will be the one that'll tell you what your balance is. And Chase will be the one that gives you more of the digital dollars, just like when you go to the ATM machine now to get more digital dollar or paper dollars out of the ATM machine. When you go to, if you bank at Chase in the future, you'll probably tap the ATM machine with your mobile phone or just do it off the internet and say, I want another 500 of those digital dollars, and they'll take it out of your Chase deposit account, just like they take it out of your account now at the ATM machine.
So I'll literally have little electrons in my phone that will be $500. So I won't need to log on to something and transfer the money. It'll kind of come out of my phone and go to someone else's phone. Is that
That's pretty much right. I mean, your phone is going to have a way to connect to your account at Chase to see whether you do indeed have the 500 digital dollars stored there, and therefore when you send 200 of them to me for your share of our dinner together, it was an expensive dinner, Chase will deduct that from your stack of digital dollars that they've recorded on your account, just like they currently deduct it from your deposit account, except it'll be a separate account for central bank digital currencies. Now that's one design. Some people have suggested we should all just have a direct account at the Fed, no Chase. We just, the Fed faces everybody and takes care of everybody. But most central banks are probably not going to go that way because it's kind of complicated for everybody to work directly with the Fed. It's not really set up as a consumer-facing institution. It tends to work more with banks. So the Fed will sell the digital dollars to Chase, and then Chase will sell the digital dollars to you.
Okay, I just have to ask one more question, because I mean, it's not like right now when the State Department pays my pension, they're sending a bag of money to Chase, right? I mean, they're making an electronic transfer of whatever's. I mean, there's not a big vault somewhere with paper money, right? So I guess, you can understand why the typical American is like, well, why do we need to do this? I mean,
Okay, so now we're getting into the reason why you would want to do it as opposed to what it is. And there are some reasons. Some people don't want to use banks, so it might reach them.
Okay.
The banks themselves are offering you, Cecile, a great service when you go in to pay for your coffee or your dinner. It seems kind of seamless. And why would you change to a digital dollar as opposed to just using your deposit account and your credit card? And if you ask the merchant or the restaurant, they might have a different attitude because it costs them a lot of money in terms of interchange fees and other fees, and they have to wait for their money. The banks are not running 24/7, 365, but digital dollars would, and they wouldn't cost very much to transfer. And so merchants would be delighted, and you'd be able, as Yaya and I will, I'm sure, discuss, send your digital dollars as a remittance to your auntie in Milano or wherever your auntie lives without any muss or fuss. Whereas today it's an extremely burdensome and expensive thing to send money cross-border. And there are many other applications for which it's going to be more convenient to use a central bank digital currency than an ordinary bank account payment.
So I want to come back to this because I can already see who's going to oppose this, right? I mean, there's people who are going to lose money in this entire operation, depending on how it's set up. But I do want to go to Yaya and talk about China, because my understanding is in China, people are still going to work through the existing payment portals that most Chinese use, that it's going to be some kind of public-private partnership between the Central Bank of China and some of these payment portals. But can you talk a little bit about exactly what is going on in China? I understand now that 10% of the public in China, which is an enormous number of people, already have, and what they're calling it, the ECNY, right? The E-Chinese Yuan. They already have a wallet for that. So how is this working in China? But more importantly, because this is where your expertise lies, what does it mean for the security of the US, for the future of the US economy, and also for the security of the human beings who live in China, that China is moving so quickly to this technology?
Yeah, well, thank you. And also thank you for inviting me. It's great to be on this panel with Darrell, who's doing so much and facilitating this conversation amongst experts. I think this question relates to your first question about, well, really, how is this different? How is this different for how China does things? And I think if I put my, I'm not a central banker, but if I put on my central banker hat, the difference is in how this digital money is created. So this is, I think, how the Chinese government had been thinking about it for the past several years, which is all those digital payments that are happening in all those digital payments that are happening in China right now. The central bank does not, the central bank does not create them. These payment companies and banks create the processes for that digital money. So the central bank doesn't really have insight into how transactions are moving, because it's the financial institutions outside the central bank that are responsible for that. So what China has done is create some new architectures. So the Chinese yuan, the digital yuan, is now this digital money created by the central bank. So yep, the payment companies, the banks are still going to manage it, but now you have this different infrastructure where the People's Bank of China really would have more insight into how money is moving, how the digital currencies are flowing, the data around it, all things which it didn't have direct access or doesn't have direct access to with the traditional deposit accounts. So what does this mean? I think there are two ways to think about it that we'll get into. One, I like to say that this is but I like to emphasize the data development here, even more so than the currency development. Because of course, we're going to talk about what does this mean for the US dollar, et cetera. But it's really a data story, because the Chinese government is in the midst of trying to develop a more digital economy. And I think from their perspective and from an outsider's perspective, I'd say that having a more data-centric, or having instruments that the government can analyze, big data, that really makes for a more data-driven digital economy. And then the second issue is the surveillance issue, which I think you alluded to, which is, of course, now the government has more insight into transaction flows. Now, we don't know exactly how that's going to show up. Does it, the government may not have access to the names of everyone that's transacting in real time, but we do know that the setup, the infrastructure is going to be one more where the government has more insight. The last thing I would say that maybe we can talk about is that there's also this question of, does this create a new system for international trade that the U.S. has less influence in? And that's where I think that's the question that a lot of us are thinking about.
So, and you brought up, I think it was in either the Wired, you did a good piece in Wired that I got a lot out of, and you also did one in Lawfare recently. I think it was in the Lawfare piece that you pointed out that if China's technology is a lot further ahead than ours, countries that also want to adopt digital currencies are going to purchase China's technology. And that technology, as we know with Huawei and other tech, that technology may come with ways for China to track what is going on in other countries. So would it behoove the US to move faster on this technology so that we could be the source of providing our version of digital currency technology?
Well, I don't think that U.S. policymakers want to do something just because China is doing it. But what I do think we're facing in the U.S. is that there's significant development and research happening with other countries on CBDC, central bank digital currencies, that we're in a position where we're not really, I don't know if I'd say we're not at the table, but we're not as invested or as involved. And even though we don't know what this is going to develop into, we do know that the alternative is a system which does not go through the traditional global banking system as much, or maybe in a different way. Yeah. And so there are definitely risks there if this develops and we're either cut out or we're just not as influential in this new potential system.
Okay. I want to ask you an equity issue. And again, I know we're talking about China today, but I also want to talk about in the US, because it seems to me for this technology to operate, you need decent internet service or decent cell phone service. And there are parts of the US still where even merchants can't get a decent internet connection, let alone people, who are living there. So do we need, at least in the US and in other countries, to develop some of our connectivity before we can even think about fairly adopting this? On the other hand, is this something that could be really good for the large number of unbanked Americans and unbanked people around the world who currently have no way to get an ATM card or a credit card or be paid electronically, all those other things that the rest of us take for granted, frankly? And I'll leave that to both of you to discuss, or either of you.
I'll just jump in just real quick to say, of course, everything depends. But on that first note, since we were talking about China, I mean, the Chinese government actually is proposing that this will help with rural payments in rural areas, because it's going to be developed in a way where some transactions can happen without an internet connection, where you just have your phone and you sort of scan someone, you scan your phone to someone else without an internet connection. So the technology could it may allow for access where you don't have actual internet payment, at least temporarily or so. So I think that's being built in. On the broader question, I think that is an area of research. I think that's an assumption. It's something that a lot of central bankers and are proposing, that this will help the unbanked. For me, I'd say the jury is out, right? It really depends on how this is going to be implemented.
Yeah. So Darrell, let's get to that, how it's going to be implemented. I mean, banks right now are charging $25 a month if you have less than $50,000 in your account. And the long periods that your money is in limbo is time that they make interest on your money, right? So 3 days while you transfer the money, 5 days, they may only be making 0.5% on it, but they're making 0.5% on it. So China's a authoritarian country. The US is not. Are countries with a little more, what should we say, democratic dynamism going to be a little slower to adopt this kind of technology? Actually, I said to Darrell, but either of you is welcome, or both of you are welcome to answer that question.
Well, I'm happy to take a shot at it, and Yaya can add to it. Yaya and I talk about these issues all the time, and we're aligned on almost everything. I'm kind of curious to see where we're not aligned, so I can get more of Yaya's insights. But let me take a shot at that. I don't think so far it seems to be an issue of democratic versus not democratic. Almost all central banks around the world are exploring this pretty carefully. The European Central Bank, for example, which is based on Western democratic economy, political system, and financial system, is in a full-scale development project and hopes to have a digital euro within a few years. The United States, as Yaya hinted, is holding back a little bit more than other countries. It's doing basic research, but not full-on development like some other countries, most prominently China, as you mentioned. China may have gone first, in part because it's authoritarian and it can make it happen quickly. In a place like the United States, it requires really a big discussion. There's not full agreement on whether it's needed. There may be at least a degree of divide between the two parties, and even within the Federal Reserve, which would be responsible for creating and distributing it. Definitely, there's no clear view at the Fed that this is a good idea. For example, Vice Chair Quarles, who's the head of banking for banking supervision for the Federal Reserve, has given a couple of speeches with great skepticism about whether this is a central bank digital currency for the United States is a good idea. And on your specific point about whether it will increase financial inclusion by letting the unbanked or low-income Americans who don't have bank accounts get access to the payment system, he is very skeptical. And he asked specifically, in fact, made a very sharp comment with respect to Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, asking her, why do you think, asking her rhetorically, why do you think that people will be willing to sign up for an account at their bank to get central bank digital currency, which is probably where they're going to get it, if they're not willing to sign up for a regular bank account? And another Fed governor, Chris Waller, has asked similarly, is CBDC for America a solution in search of a problem? Now, other Fed governors have been more sanguine about the idea. Federal Reserve Governor Lael Brainerd has said that she, quote unquote, cannot wrap her head around the idea that the United States would not be developing a digital dollar. And part of the reason that she's suggested that it puzzles her that we wouldn't want to have a digital dollar development project is what Yaya hinted at, which is China is getting a measure of leadership internationally on standard setting and prestige in this area. And the United States, if it wants to be a full participant, it would be probably more helpful if the United States said, yes, we're developing it too. Here's the standards that that we believe are appropriate. You have more credibility, of course, if you're in a full-on development. I think the US should enter into a full-on development project. But, you know, on this issue of financial inclusion, it's by far not clear how much it can increase financial inclusion. It's a great motive. There's promise that it could work, but we won't really know until the technology is developed. So we should get it started now. We wouldn't want to find out 5 years from now that we really need it because everybody else is using it. It's becoming very common for cross-border transactions. And all of a sudden, we have to start a 5-year development project to get one.
Interesting. So thank you. Yaya, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of refer to some of the disagreement that has happened that Darrell really outlined very well. And my thoughts, I mean, I'll say that my opinion, my thinking on this has evolved. I think, I don't know, 3 months ago, I would have been more hesitant on the question of should the US have a CBDC. I'll have to say today, I lean more towards the Lael Brainerd view of it, you know, really just makes sense that the US is going to be in the CBDC game, if I can say in some way, because when you look at my opinion, right? I mean, when you look at some of the pushback, a lot of people have written great, you know, articles and reports about the risk and why maybe, you know, we don't need a digital dollar. But when I look at most of those concerns, they tend to be things that I think are manageable or can be dealt with as technology advances or more research. And I think it sort of comes down to, are there technologies or are there technical capabilities that are out there that, you know, you just need a different system to do, and that, you know, we can't just use our current system to do? And I think the answer to that is yes. And, you know, I don't know if this is a good metaphor, but the way I sort of describe how I think some of the, you know, CBDC resistant people are saying, some of them will say at the Fed, and this is not to put the Fed down, obviously, or any specific projects, but, you know, the Fed is trying to make faster payments. You know, that's Fed Now is an ongoing project, right? So that's already in the works. But if I can be a little, I don't know, a little provocative, I sort of see it almost as if, you know, Henry Ford is your neighbor, and Henry Ford is in his garage and he's working on this new invention, and you walk by him every day, right? And it's 1900 whatever. And in your garage, what you're doing is you're really tuning up your buggy. You're making a faster buggy. So you walk by Henry Ford and you say, like, you know, I'm already making a faster buggy. I'm going to ignore what Henry Ford is doing because I really am, you know, really working on this buggy. It's going to be great in a couple of years, while there's development with new capabilities that we may be missing out on.
So
I don't know, maybe we haven't talked about what those capabilities are, smart contracts and other things.
Yeah, so let's come back to that. But I want to do a follow up on this, because the Chinese government has said they have various reasons for adopting this central bank digital currency, which is CBDC. And one of them is they will be able to find people breaking the law, whether it's tax law or other scuff laws, because they'll know what people are doing. I mean, they already know what people are doing. Let's be honest, you know, they don't need a digital yuan. They can just demand that, is it Wei is one of the payment, whatever the 2 payment methods are over there, can just turn over their records. But this will give them faster access to that information. And I suspect that what worries many people in the US is this idea of the Fed seeing that someone's making $100 a week babysitting on the side, right? And suddenly the IRS is going to come after the person. And we know there's sensitivities, that we've seen it recently with some changes the IRS wanted to make. There's sensitivity on those kinds of things. So what are the protections for people, whether in China or in the US? I mean, is it possible to protect a certain amount of privacy, and will governments even want to protect people's privacy with these types of currencies?
Let me take a shot at that. I think that you've asked, Cecile, probably the most important question that we're going to discuss today, which is the issue of privacy, because it is true that when you have a central bank digital currency, in principle, you're running vast amounts of payment data that's private through a single system. And now you need protections. They can be done cryptographically, they can be done legally, but one of the key issues is, will people trust them? And will it, in the end, will your transactions and your personal information be private? China is a much different country than the United States, where the discussion of whether it should be done is less democratic. It's the nature of the country. and also the desire of the government to control information, control data has become very apparent, especially in the last year when the two private fintech services that make payments in China that you referred to, which are called Alipay and WeChat Pay, have been required to hand over their data to the government. The CBDC for China will only make it easier for the government to have that data. The central bank in China, which is called the People's Bank of China, has said, we're not planning to share that data with anyone else. It's private information. We're only going to use it to check the legality of payments, as you mentioned, Cecile. But there have been concerns expressed that surveillance will nevertheless occur. And, you know, the People's Bank of China, it's an authoritarian state. If the People's Bank of China is told by the state ministry in charge of it, the state council, please give us the data on Cecile and all her payments in China over the past year, the People's Bank of China will pretty much have to comply. They don't really have a choice. They report directly to the state council. They're not an independent central bank. So I think, you know, it's a complete difference in the United States. Americans do expect that the government will protect their privacy, but while they expect that, not all Americans will trust that it's going to happen. And so for the case in the US, first there has to be a discussion, agreement, probably congressional legislation saying we're going to do this. And a lot of the concerns will be over privacy. And then when it's done, the design has to respect privacy, probably by cryptographic methods that just make it very difficult for undue surveillance on individual payments. Because my impression of Americans, I'm a Canadian myself, but my impression of many Americans is they don't want their private data held in a central database where it's accessible by the government in an easy way, unless there are very compelling legal reasons to suspect that a criminal payment has been made.
Yeah, I think you're accurate in that impression of Americans, certainly. And I think many countries' citizens would feel that way about this sort of thing. So thank you. Yaya, anything to add to that? And then we'll move on to, I think you both wanted to talk about some of the benefits of this, which have to do with international trade and remittances. So, or whatever else you think we've skipped at this point, and then we'll move to questions. This is a reminder to all of our viewers that if you log on to ccga.live, you can ask us questions and upvote questions, which I'm going to turn to in a moment. So go ahead and log on now. Okay, so talk about some of the benefits in terms of trade and international payments.
Well, I'll say something. I know, Darrell has much more experience on the trade and macroeconomic issues, but one of the things that I started to look at when I saw what the PBOC, People's Bank of China, was doing is this openness to connect this new digital currency with smart contracts or build smart contracts. And what that really means, what smart contracts are really just code that you can execute, orders to execute a transaction, to do certain things, which now are very difficult. It's hard for me to write a code and to sort of write in my Venmo payment into it. So because the digital currency is it's data, then you could imagine, I can imagine a lot of different functions. I can imagine doing payments that are much smaller. So for example, if any of us wanted to transact in, let's say, 1/3 of a penny, we can't do that right now. But I think theoretically, I think we could if we had a digital dollar, if you had a digital fiat currency, you could divide it up into much smaller transactions or into smaller units. So things like that, which you have when you have really computer generated a digital asset, could probably unlock a lot of different types of payments, a lot of different arrangements, and innovation would probably flow from that. And to me, that really weighs heavy on the scale of, wow, what's possible that we can't do with our current financial infrastructure.
I'd like to add to that if I could, Cecile.
Yeah, please.
First of all, I agree with Yaya completely on the power of smart contracting and the advantages of a digital dollar technology. But I want to pull back to the broader issue that you started with, which is trade and cross-border payments. Probably most of the people at the Chicago Council will remember the famous words of former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing when he complained about the, quote, exorbitant privilege, unquote, of the US dollar, meaning that everybody internationally loves to use the US dollar for finance and trade. And central banks around the world store their wealth in the form of US, in large part in US dollars, far more than any other country, including China. China is way down the list. And the question arises, how much of that advantage will be retained if central bank digital currencies are used for cross-border payments, and in particular, whether China starts to make inroads into the use of cross-border payments via central bank digital currencies. My view on that is it's a very important question that in the near term, in the next few years, there won't be any change in the dominance of the dollar that you could notice. But over the next decades, leadership in the area of cross-border payment technology could make a difference. Right now, everybody, if they're, let's say they're exchanging Thai baht for euros or Australian dollars for Canadian dollars, most of the time they take an intermediate step into the US dollar because dollar exchange markets are so liquid. Most of the time when you're buying oil or any kind of international commodities, they're invoiced in US dollars. And that recent research by Professor Jeremy Stein at Harvard and Geeta Gopinath, who's the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund, has shown that the currency in which international invoices are written, now the dollar, really gives the dollar a leg up on other currencies and lowers the cost of US businesses for financing themselves, improves the ability of the United States government to finance itself more cheaply. So these are huge questions that are looming over the next few decades, and beginning right now with the development of a digital dollar in terms of its technology will put the US in a stronger position if it becomes necessary to use it.
So that's a good segue to a couple of questions who are my kinsmen, I can tell by the questions they're asking, because I'm still not sure I'm totally getting this. Because right now, China holds a huge amount of US bonds, right? Currency, in other words. So, but they don't have piles of money or piles of paper sitting in some safe somewhere, right? It's already electronic. When BP buys oil from so-and-so over in Saudi Arabia, they're not shipping gold over, they're electronically transferring whatever, electrons, right? How will, I still am not sure that I or some of our viewers, listeners apparently, understand how a digital dollar being transferred will be different from the current system.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start on that. Money, the vast majority of money transfers internationally are done electronically. And so the advent of central bank digital currencies won't change that. It'll be another electronic transfer system. But there are many different ways to make electronic transfers of money. One is credit cards, one is international remittances, right. One is cross-border payments, which are done between banks. Very, very slow and expensive, frustrating. If you've ever tried to send, again, a gift to your relative in Europe, or you've tried to get paid for a consulting fee that you earned when you were in Amsterdam, you probably noticed it took a long time and you lost probably 5% of your money or something like that. Well, that's just unacceptable. And so the fact that you got paid electronically eventually at some cost is not enough. You really want to get paid efficiently and quickly. And whose technology is used and whose electronic money is used will matter a lot. And central bank money is going to be very dominant in that discussion.
So this way, if I'm, buying a pair of shoes in Switzerland, there would be a way for me to send the money from the Fed to whatever the Central Bank of Switzerland is without having to have 3 intermediary banks necessarily. Is that
could be. We don't know yet how it's going to work. And Yaya and I were just discussing earlier today that technology that's being developed for doing just that. And Yaya, maybe you could relate what you learned about the role of firms like Goldman Sachs in the cross-border payments.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that, Cecile, to get to your sort of conundrum, is the idea is that the back end is constructed differently, right? So maybe it doesn't, I think Darrell alluded to earlier, it doesn't matter for the end user, right? Maybe you're not going to see a difference in user experience except for the time issue, right? For at least for international payments, that would be a huge issue. So but the back end is where there is the difference. So if currently the United States during that process, it's happening through dollars somehow, even though it's electronic, it's digital deposit, it's digital accounts, but you have US institutions that it's going through. We haven't talked a lot about sanctions or anything. What that means is that, you know, the US that financial institutions are critical to this process. So if CBDCs develop in a way that, again, not necessarily eliminating the use of financial institutions, but just taking some of them out, you know, some of that out of the process, you just, I mean, at the end of the day, you have potentially less US influence or US insight. And I think that's the question or concern, but it does depend on how it is developed.
Okay, and if we can show some leadership in how we set up our rules and our processes, perhaps countries will want to follow our rules and processes rather than following another country's rules and processes, which will not be to our benefit potentially.
Exactly right.
So we have a lot of questions about security. I think they may have watched the same TV show I did last week about some bad guys who stole a briefcase full of crypto dollars. But we should first of all say this is not cryptocurrency. But what if there's some horrible event and it takes out the computer somewhere that's storing all of these digital whatevers, or in theory, the computer can be hacked? I mean, the computer can be hacked now, right? That's kind of the point. I mean, however the money is stored, it can still be hacked. But what are the catastrophic security problems that we are facing with a move to digital dollars like this?
Well,
maybe
go ahead, Yaya.
okay.
After you.
Yeah, just a slight, a quick thought is, you know, maybe that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of hesitancy on the part of US policymakers, given the, you know, outsized influence and role of the US dollar, of US banks. You know, but to me, what this means is that this sort of decision shouldn't be taken lightly. And it also, in my mind, means that, you know, we would have to have in the US, we'd have to have an intense R&D, you know, research and development on security, cybersecurity, privacy. I actually think that there's an opening for intense study and research on how to, you know, tackle these problems. But Darrell?
No, totally agree. It ups the ante on cyber resilience of the payment system. We already have that as our top issue for financial stability in the US. And if it were to become highly centralized in one system, or much more concentrated, then that would just increase the importance of making it technologically bulletproof. Professor Neha Narula at MIT has written about this issue, expressing concerns whether, you know, stable coins, which are a form of cryptocurrency that could be used for payments, will be bulletproof. And she's working on central bank digital currency technology, trying to improve that technology to the point where it becomes extremely reliable. And she's doing that for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and a Fed project to do R&D on the digital dollar. But there's so much more to do. As Yaya and I have suggested, there should be a full-on effort to develop that technology to the point where we're really confident that it's good, and not jump ahead into it until it's really strong.
So there are a lot of countries in the world that peg their currency to US dollars. There are countries in the world where the dollars are the day-to-day currency, no matter what is coming out of their central bank, if they even have a central bank. And it occurs to me that if we went to digital dollars, those countries might just decide we're going to stop printing money and everyone's just going to use digital dollars. And it's going to save us a lot of heartache. Secret Service would be happy because the amount of counterfeit money circulating on the international stage is enormous in terms of counterfeit paper money. But I guess the flip side of that is, if we aren't in the market with these kind of digital dollars available, can you see other countries potentially adopting their renminbi or the yuan as its currency, or starting to peg their own currency to the yuan so that they could perhaps utilize some of these digital dollars? I can see that as being a fear in the long term, or a concern in the long term.
Well, the People's Bank of China, which is responsible for the digital renminbi, has said that that's not an objective for them, that other countries use their digital currency. And the former head of the PBOC has said they don't want to do yuanization, which, it's a new version of dollarization of foreign economies. Now, having said that, doesn't mean that cryptocurrencies denominated in renminbis might not circulate. Those could be important. Similar to the China central bank, I don't think the Fed would want a US digital dollar to circulate internationally in the payment systems of other countries. It could be quite disruptive. The G7 countries, including the United States, Canada, the UK, Japan, and others, have recently said that's a key objective for central bank digital currencies, that they don't mess up the financial systems of other countries by invading them. So, I don't anticipate that the Fed will have accounts with digital dollars for many international firms or individuals. I think that's unlikely. But again, it doesn't rule out a US dollar stablecoin being used in places like Argentina, where, for example, paper US dollars are very popular as a payment method. And some countries will need to watch out that they don't lose control of their own monetary arrangements as foreign currencies do invade their system. It might not be better, Cecile, it might be worse for some countries.
Well, there are private companies, I think that Yaya has written about this. There are private companies that are looking at a dollar stable coin. Is that what it was called? Digital coin? I'm using the word wrong, but Facebook, now called Meta, is one of the companies that's been kind of thinking along those lines. Am I right? Is there a reason for the US to get out in front of the private sector on some of these issues?
Well, the thing is, some would say yes, but other countries have felt the exact same way. I mean, some could say that the rise of global stable coins, whether it's Tether or some of these others, actually has spurred the central banks to start looking at they're creating these CBDCs. And there's a term that I've heard so much this year, which I didn't hear as much, which is monetary sovereignty. You hear this term amongst even central banker circles, that countries are concerned that some digital currency, whether it is a crypto stablecoin or whether it is some other nation's digital currency, even in theory, people are concerned. They don't want to be invaded, as Darrell pointed out. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons for countries to be a little bit more assertive about protecting their monetary space.
Yeah, and there was a couple questions. Cryptocurrencies are different from what are basically digitized sovereign currencies, right? When we're today talking about digitized sovereign currencies or central bank managed currencies, and these do not require blockchain. So central bank managed currencies can be based on blockchain, but are not usually based on blockchain. I believe I'm getting that right. I just wanted to respond to some of the many questions. And I apologize to all of you who sent questions, because we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But I want to give our really outstanding speakers, and thank you for putting up with my slowness. But these are hard concepts, I think, initially to understand. I want to give each of you 1 minute to leave us with the most important thought on China's adoption of a digital currency and what it means for the US and what it means for the world. So Darrell, we opened with you. So Yaya, can we open with you for the closure, and then we'll go to Darrell? Or do you want to go with Darrell first?
No, I'll just go down.
Okay,
I'll be very quick. And I think the takeaway for me maybe is the US message, or the message I think for the US, which is to think about for policymakers to think about this strategically, that there doesn't have to be an all or nothing decision between CBDCs. It doesn't have to be accounts at the Fed. And it also doesn't have to be only stable coins and the Fed does nothing. I think we need to take a measured approach. And I think, it's funny, just pointing at China, I mean, even though I can, look to the risk and some of the downsides of how China is doing it, China actually took several years. I mean, they started this research in 2014. They created their research institute in 2016. So this wasn't something they just trotted out over a few months. And I think that's actually a lesson for the US, that we should be thinking strategically and we should be planning just as other countries are.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure sometimes, right? Better to get ahead of it than to try to catch up. Darrell, you have the last word today.
Yeah, well, I'm going to resonate a lot with what Yaya said. China does deserve credit for having a plan and proceeding with it and developing, being the first large country to roll out a central bank digital currency. What the United States doesn't need to be reactive to China. What the US needs to improve its financial system, irregardless of whether China has a central bank digital currency. And just as Yaya said, it doesn't need to be one solution. The US should move on all fronts. It should improve its bank railed payments by making banks more competitive and innovative. It should allow fintech firms and stablecoins to be used with under careful controls that make sure that they're useful and don't create financial stability problems or issues with consumer protection and investor protection. And at the same time, the United States needs to begin the development of the technology for a central bank digital currency, because if all the other approaches don't work, you don't want to be up the creek without a paddle, meaning 5 years from now say, uh-oh, we should have started 5 years ago because it takes 5 more years to get this thing ready, and now we really need it. So that development project should begin now. And I think the government is onto it. The Congress, the administration, and the Fed are all have this conversation going intensely right now. And I expect that we're going to see some significant, at least policy conversations going public in the next few weeks.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you to both of you. We could spend a lot more time talking about this, I know, and perhaps we'll have another session in the future, because I think there's a lot of interest out there into both what this technology is, what it will mean for the US, and what China's very fast development of this technology means for the world and our future. Thank you to both of you, and see you again soon, I hope. And thank you to our viewers, and please stay tuned with the Chicago Council. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cecile.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Yaya. Good to see you.
Thanks, Darrell. Same here.